Over the course of battle on the 31st of May 1916, Vice Admiral Hipper's flagship, Lutzow, was subjected to extensive concentrated fire from British battleships and battlecruisers. The end of the day's action saw that Lutzow received 24 shell hits, and most of these were concentrated in the forward half of the ship, including along the waterline, allowing extensive flooding of the bow to take place. As Lutzow attempted to return to Germany, its condition only worsened as progressive flooding took place through leaking bulkheads, and by 2 a.m. on the 1st of June, it was announced that nearly 8,000 tons of water had entered the bow of the ship. As the bow sank deeper, the four propellers began to rise too high from the water, and eventually they became useless in propelling the ship, and towing operations with destroyers proved impossible. As a result, the order to abandon ship was given, and by 2:45 this had been completed. At 2:47, destroyer G-38 fired 2 torpedoes at Lutzow's starboard side. One ran under the ship, but the second struck amidships, and within a few moments, Lutzow capsized to starboard and sank beneath the surface. A total of 128 men would lose their lives as a result of the battle and subsequent sinking of the ship. Skip forward to the year 1960, and the United Kingdom's Hydrographic Office had been alerted that the wreck of Lutzow was discovered, and by the end of that year, they were also alerted to the fact that salvage operations had been conducted by an unknown company. Over the course of the upcoming decades, Lutzow's wreck would remain unexplored and undocumented. However, it's known several salvage operations took place an unknown number of times by unknown entities. In 1990, the 75th anniversary expedition, which was composed of members of the military, was the first attempt in Lutzow's history to properly examine and document the wreck. Their efforts to document the wreck were difficult because they were consistently dealing with bad weather and poor visibility. However, it was apparent that the bulk of Lutzow's wreck was residing upside down, and it was also clear that the hull had suffered from extensive damage, but they couldn't exactly tell what had caused the damage, as it was difficult for them to orient their position on the wreck. The results of the 75th anniversary expedition were disappointing. However, it was not the end of the story, as a decade later, in the year 2000, an expedition team led by Innes McCartney would dive the wreck of Lutzow, as he was attempting to locate and identify all of the sunken ships from Jutland. Between the years 2000 and 2003, he would dive the wreck 3 times, and then he would return for a 4th time in the year 2000, where he would scan the wreck using a multi-beam survey. Several details concerning Lutzow's wreck became apparent over the course of Innes McCartney's expeditions. Firstly, the ship's bow was pointing south, which was the last known orientation of the ship since it was attempting to return to Germany. He also noted a large accumulation of debris to the western side of the hull, which supports the idea that the ship capsized to starboard, as witnesses reported. Interestingly, Lutzow during service had an overall length of 210 meters, but when measuring the wreckage from the multi-beam survey, it became apparent approximately 10 meters of Lutzow is missing. Finally, the extent of the salvage operations that had been conducted on the wreck between 1960 and 1990 was fully exposed, as the ship had suffered from extensive collapsing, and there is a minimum of 6 salvage operation areas. Lutzow was among the most intriguing targets for salvage operations because it was a large ship, meaning it had a large amount of valuable materials, and it was upside down, meaning these valuable materials, which were primarily concentrated in the machinery spaces, were now at the top of the wreck. Due to the obvious nature of the salvage work, we're capable of pinpointing exactly what areas of the ship were salvaged. Starting with the bow of the ship, the forward magazines, Boiler Room 6, and part of Boiler Room 5 have largely been gutted. Due to the massive area this section of salvage covers, and due to the fact that a torpedo hole has yet to be found in the wreck, it's assumed that the torpedo had struck in this area of the ship, and the torpedo damage has been removed. The second salvage area covers part of the C magazines and part of the forward engine room. The third location covers the after engine room and part of the D magazines. Finally, the 4th, 5th, and 6th areas cover the steering mechanisms and the ship's propeller and shafting arrangements. Taking into consideration that the ship is upside down and much of it has been salvaged, there is still quite a bit to see on the wreck, though not too much of it is unexpected. One of the most interesting aspects to the wreck, in my opinion, has to do with the 15-centimeter secondary guns, as along both sides of the wreck, at the ocean floor, the casemates are still fully exposed, allowing us to document the orientation of the ship's secondary battery. Another fascinating aspect of the wreck has to do with its ammunition. Due to the extensive salvage work that had occurred around the A and B magazines, these shells and propellant are fully exposed. What's particularly interesting about this discovery has to do with the ship's propellant, because the German guns were loaded with a two-stage propellant, a forward charge that had a cartridge that disintegrated upon firing, and the after charge, which was within a brass cartridge that did not disintegrate and was ejected from the breech upon the gun firing. As designed, there was an ejection slot in the back of the turret that the brass cartridge would then be dumped out of the turret. However, during the First World War, Germany began to run low on brass, and by the time of Battle of Jutland, there were orders to actually return the brass cartridges back to the magazines to later be refilled and reused, and finding a large number of empty cartridges confirms that Lutzow's crew was following this new procedure. There are also a handful of miscellaneous items lying around the ship's wreckage, such as this cage light, which was a common feature aboard German ships in the First World War, small arms ammunition, presumably for anti-boarding operations, and there's also this piece of auxiliary machinery that has yet to be identified. As I've already stated, the poor orientation and condition of the wreck makes it one of the least valuable wrecks for research as far as the Jutland wrecks go. However, it is the only existing German battlecruiser hull we still have, and in that respect, it makes every find very valuable. As the ship's condition continues to deteriorate and more interior spaces become visible, hopefully more extraordinary new finds will come. But for now, that is all I have to say on this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.